In this session, we are going to discuss a new security related topic about the resource limits for the on namespace basis. So normally what happen when you set up a Kubernetes cluster, so is a specific number of CPU and RAM and uh, whatever resources you allocated in your cluster. So when you will create the RBAC users, so users can create and different resources and can use different the amount of CPU and the number of CPU and memory to set up their pods. So they can consume all the resources on your cluster. But by using the quota, resource quota, you can limit the users to occupy the resources within some specific limit. So if we go to documentation and we look for quota, so here the resource quota. When several users or a team share a cluster with a fixed number of nodes, there is a concern that one team could use more than its fair share of resources. So this quota will be apply on the namespace basis. So you remember if you we did in our RBAC session the allocation of specific namespace uh, to the user. So that namespace, that user can only perform in that specific namespace, and we can limit the resources, memory, and CPU in that namespace. So if we go down to enable resource quota, so we can limit the whenever we are allocating the CPU and memory, so we are allocating request and limit. So we can define the max number of CPU and max number of memory that is usable by all the pods. Similarly, huge page we can define. So these are the resources limit we can apply. So let me apply a very basic sample quota. I have this manifest. So if I show you the kubectl get API resources, you can see the resources quota is the API resource that can help us to control the resources. So I can limit the CPU and RAM and the max number of pods and max number of services, secrets, config map, replica set, deployment, whatever API resources are available, I can limit by using this resource quotas. So here is an example of sample quota. So in this manifest, I am going to apply going to create for dev namespace. I can say something its meaningful name like dev quota and namespace in the dev. I I am limiting the max request we can set in all the pods collectively up to 2 CPUs, mean 2000 millicores. Max request memory we can set 4 GB, and limit of CPU we can go up to 4 CPU, and limit of memory is 8 GB. More, you cannot set up more than 10 pods. Let me just set to lower number, like 3. Services I cannot create more than one, for example. Persistent volume claim I cannot create more than 5. Config map, uh, for example, 1. Similarly, secret 1. Okay, I'm just making a very simple resource quota. So let me apply this. In the dev namespace, this is my dev quota, and these are all the limits I you can see are applied on this quota. So if I do a describe this dev quota source in the dev namespace, so it is giving us the config map. We can use right now what is a max limit is the hard limit, and how many are in use it is given here. So here, we already set up some resources, just like service in the dev namespace, sorry, SVC. So there are already 4 services. So we already crossed this limit. But we can use these resources for services, but we cannot provision anymore. So if there are already some resources set up, so those resources will be remain up and running, but anyone new you will create, it will be checked by this resource quota. Similarly, I already have a secret. That's why it's showing me 1 out of 1 secret is already in use. I am not running any pod, I believe. Yes. So that's why zero amount of CPU and RAM in a limit and request is consumed. Config map, by default, each namespace has a default config map. We discussed this in detail in our back sessions. So let me set up a pod, and kubectl. For example, I already have some manifest. Check what is right in this. So here, this is a pod with app1 quota. It's the name, and it is running in which namespace is not defined. Let me set its namespace. Just like app4 is the name, and its namespace in the dev. I will create this, and I am going to allocate a resource request of memory 10 GB and CPU 500 millicore, and limit of 10 GB. Let me just reduce it this memory to, for example, 256 megabyte, and 100 millicore CPU request, and max it can go up to half CPU 500 millicore, and RAM, it can go up to 1 GB max. And okay, we apply this. So it is created. Now let me describe the quota. So you can see the 500 uh, request of 100 millicore is allocated to this pod I ran, and max CPU is also allocated. It's mean uh, the remaining CPU left behind is, you can say, 1.9, 1900 millicore for the request, and 3500 millicore for the limit. And memory limit 1 GB are already allocated, and 256 I consumed, and one pod out of three I consumed. Okay, so let me now just modify the same config, just changing app3 and just changing the CPU millicore memory, for example. Here I am setting 500, and here I am using one CPU. If I are just writing 1, 2, 3, it's been one complete core. If you're writing M, it's a millicore, and it is going up to 1 GB max. Okay, so now kubectl get pods. So there are two pods running. If I describe the quota, so the quota use once CPU more I allocated, the first pod was limit was 500, so 1500 millicore I occupied, and two pods allocated. Now one more pod I am going to set up, but this time I will set up the memory something like request memory something like 6 GB. Okay, and go up to, you can say, 6 GB max, or up to 7 GB. Okay, so this time it will give me an error. Let me change this app to this time it gave me error that pod is forbidden exceeding quota, dev quota, request limit memory 7 GB, request memory 6 GB. So limit and requested and used is 2 GB, and this is the limit is up to 8 GB. So we are crossing the limit that we have allocated here. Mean I cannot allocate the request memory more than 4 GB for the overall, for all the pods. So all the pods collectively can use 4 GB as a request and 8 GB as a limit. Similarly, CPUs. So I will change this value to, again, change to, for example, 1 GB, and okay, 7 GB I cannot allocate, 3 GB and one CPU is created. Describe. So I have reached almost to the limit. So now if I am going to run any pod, in dev namespace, we cannot run because the max number of pods limit memory failed quota must specify limit CPU. I mean, we must have to specify the CPU limit. This is the reason. And the other reason is, mean, I cannot set up a pod that can use all the resources. So I must have to apply some limit. So let me just modify the existing here. So you cannot set up a pod without the resource limit when the quota is allocated. So 1 GB. Okay, let me just change this to 2 GB. Okay, so now the error is different. Last time error was you must have to set some request memory, request CPU, limit memory, limit CPU. But this time it is saying that pod, you are going to set up the pod within the limit, but you cannot set up more than 3 pods. So with this way, we have limited our resources. Now, still there is a problem. Mean you have allocated a quota to dev namespace to this amount, hard limit. A specific user can consume all the resources within a single pod, or that user can consume all the resources uh, uh, max number of resources by allocating. So the solution is we can create another resource that is limit. I believe there is some limit. There is one resource limit range. So limit ranges is an API resource where we can force each newly created pod to use some specific amount of CPU and RAM request and limits forcefully. So here I am going to create a sample limit. So here in this limit, I am setting something. I can say the name dev limits in dev namespace. And max number of CPU a user can allocate to a pod in dev namespace is max 1 CPU. A user cannot allocate more than 2 CPU. A user cannot allocate more than 1 GB RAM. Okay, and minimum CPU is 100 millicore. A user cannot allocate less than 100 millicore, and user cannot allocate memory less than 128 megabyte. And if user is not setting the resource limit, the by default all the pods without resource limit will get these limits. Default limit and default request. So if this is request and this is a limit. So if I and type container. So now kubectl get pod hyphen and dev. Let me delete these pods. And now I will apply this. I think the short name is limit or limits. The dev namespace. And we need to describe this. And here, minimum amount of CPU and RAM and max is defined for a single resource and default resources. We can also default limit, default request, and default limit, max limit request ratio. I don't know exactly what is this value, but let me test this one. So if I am setting up the pod kubectl run app1, the dev namespace, this time it is scheduled. Why? Because this dev container, if I describe this container automatically gain, you can see the limits and request, whatever I defined. So with whenever user try to run a pod without any limits, it will automatically gain these limits. And now if I want to again this app1.yml, here what I did 1 GB and 500 millicore and 2 GB and 1 CPU. Let me check what is my limit. So minimum and max 1 CPU and memory 1 GB. Okay, so let me bypass this minimum 100 millicore. So minimum mean request, let me do a 50 millicore and RAM 128 GB. Okay, let me just make this within the range. Just I am bypassing the rule for CPU. For example, RAM I want 256 GB and 1 GB and 1 CPU. CTL apply -F. So here you can see must be less than or equal to the memory limit of 1 G. This 256 GB RAM. Yeah. So minimum must be 128. So I allocate 256 G. And let me just change this to 128. And this time it should give me the CPU. It is GB, sorry. 256 mega. I mistakenly set to gigabyte. That's why it gave me the error 256 GB is not allowable according to this limit or the resource quota. So 256 megabyte and 50 millicore. So here, this time missing annotation, I missed something. Request 256 and 1G CPU 50 millicore CPU 1. Everything seems good. App1 specs container for a pod update may not be added or remove container. The missing annotation will be patched automatically. The source is missing the applied configuration annotation which is required by apply should only be used to resource created declaratively by either. I don't know what is this error. Create. Yes, I think I cannot use apply when I am using the limit. But when I did the create, normally app is apply is used when you want to update some manifest. I already running resource with the manifest. So we should use create very first time. So kubectl, let me check if kubectl get pod -n dev is running. Yeah, that was already running. Let me just delete. App1 was already running. That's why it was giving me error. I can create. I can use apply too. I just need to modify this to app2. Sorry, my bad. I can apply. So this time it is giving me error. Minimum CPU usage per container is 100 millicore, but I set to 50 millicore. That's why I cannot set up this. So I forcefully set the user to use at least 200 millicore. So let me set this to 150 millicore. Now I can run this pod. As you can see, now both pods are running. So the limit gave me two benefits. One is automatically allocation of limits, and second thing is forcefully it is applying the limits. So if I describe the limit, so now this is just a description. Okay, so now let me bypass the policy again by using CPU to, for example, 10G of memory I want to allocate, or 4G, 4 GB of memory and CPUs. The quota can allow this limit, but limits are will deny. This time you can see, but limit is 4G. Max memory usage is 1G. Okay, so with this way, if you limit a user, quota said that we cannot set up the pod up to more than 3. So a user cannot use more than 3 GB of RAM. And even the quota is allowing you to set the limit up to 8 GB. So this is the way how you can control the limits. You can apply security on the resources in your cluster.